Right, so Dominic Raab, there's always been something about him, hasn't there? A cold-blooded reptilianness to him. It doesn't help that he smiles like a Jurassic Park Velociraptor before it jumps and disembowels you, really, whilst also looking like a cross between Rick Mayall's Alan Bastard and that inept bloke who didn't know what he was doing running the holiday park in Heidi High. Indeed, all those comparisons seem to sum Raab's parliamentary career up. Incompetence, nastiness, and once he smelt blood, just seems to keep on attacking. All the traits of a bully. So maybe that's why nobody in particular was surprised to see him accused of being a bully. Get found out after investigation that he was indeed a bully and ends up posting a resignation letter, still claiming otherwise, whilst basically whinging and crying about it like all bullies actually do, because that's the thing with bullies, isn't it? They think they're big, they think they're clever, they think they hold all the cards and have all the power. But when people get together to take them on, they discover how alone they really are. Raab is a guy who thought being a bully has made no friends. The support he's had from Rishi Sunak was again in return for services rendered and a need to shore up his own position, not out of any interest other than his own. Raab had run the Department for Justice and been the Deputy Prime Minister under Boris Johnson before being given his marching orders by Liz Truss, having backed Rishi Sunak against her at that point. Under Johnson, Raab had been in both roles for a year, since September of 2021 through to September of 2022. And during this time, Raab's behaviour came under scrutiny after complaints were made against him by civil servants in his department. He lost his temper quickly. He created a culture of fear. Staff became scared to enter his office. Nothing specific, though. There were numerous complaints. Now, I'm a town councillor. I work with people at town council level, like the town clerk, like the projects manager, like the mayor's secretary, and more of these people. And they're on hand in all meetings we have and hold where we conduct town council business. They are our equivalent to the civil service, and believe me, they know a damn sight more about running things than I and pretty much every other councillor does. We're elected to do what we do. We are there for fixed terms before we have to reapply ourselves to remain and continue. They are employees, and many have been there for many years, therefore know exactly how things are done, how things are run, and without them, things would utterly fall apart. What on earth are we, and indeed MPs, for then, you might think? And of course, that's all about having ultimate decision-making, having been handed a mandate to do so by the public. But delivering on them is done by people vastly more knowledgeable than we are. Now, the civil service is their equivalent at government level. For Raab to create such a culture of fear and bullying amongst such people, I can guarantee that know more about running his department than he does. It's pretty disgusting, it's pretty low, and to my mind can only demonstrate what is a superiority complex issue with the man. I'm an MP, I'm a big I am, listen to me, do as I say. That kind of attitude. Needless to say, however, with Johnson in charge, nothing ever got done to do anything about him, because nobody has a bigger superiority complex than that partying albino yeti, yet we're all keen to see the back of as well. We move on to the here and now with Raab, though, because, of course, Dominic Raab had run Sunak's campaign against Truss. He backed Sunak again to take over from her, stuck with him. Sunak, of course, by this point had no competition on this occasion, basically getting anointed Prime Minister without even a mandate from his own membership, though being brown-skinned, I doubt Sunak wanted them involved anyway. They chose Truss over him, and Truss is never, ever the answer to any question, unless the question happens to concern white privilege or degrees of dumbassery. At any rate, Sunak had to reward his supporters. It's what they do when they get elected, when they win, reward their mates, and this is what Sunak did. To shore up his mandateless, weak position, and Raab was handed back the Deputy PM and Justice Secretary gigs. It's notable that his actions towards staff under Johnson weren't ignored at this point, because upon receiving the news Raab was on his way back to the department, senior civil servants, at least, were offered respite or ways out of the department to go elsewhere, to get away from him. And perhaps from the government's perspective, it had head off any more complaints heading Sunak's way about him. People in that department still actually traumatized by how they had been treated by Raab previously. It really shows how much Sunak gave a damn about them by giving Raab back this brief instead of somebody else, I guess. But then Sunak is a weakling and Raab is a bully. I wonder who was really in charge when it came to that decision. Did Raab just turn around and say, I'm going back there? Raab even got warned by his permanent secretary upon his return, the most senior civil servant in that department, and fair play to her for standing up to Raab to do so, a woman called Antonia Romeo, that he must treat staff professionally and with respect. That was on the 11th of November last year. By the 16th of November, an investigation was launched. It seems he didn't listen and didn't waste any time either, and those affected by Raab previously, and perhaps right after he returned to the post, weren't prepared to be ignored by Sunak, perhaps, as they had been under Johnson. Allegations were made by people who had worked under Raab when he was the Brexit secretary under Theresa May. That came out. Thuggishness, aggressiveness and bullying. He was Foreign Secretary under Johnson prior to taking up the Ministry of Justice role. And again, complaints from his time in that department quickly surfaced too. In fact, Raab's permanent secretary at the Foreign Office appeared on LBC, and he was asked whether the characterizations of Raab as somebody who could bully and around whom bullying could happen was a plausible one. He simply replied, yes. It seems like the civil service itself was showing a bit of solidarity with each other, with that a serial abuser of staff, alleged as it was at that point, needed taking to task, and this needed to be taken seriously, finally, by somebody in this rotten Tory administration. It's notable that Raab laid the blame for his downfall at the feet of over-unionised civil servants. Collective action, solidarity. Clearly, joining a union is a very good thing. If you're not in one, perhaps you should think about it. And nobody can ever be over-unionised, nonsense term, when you're paying for employment protection. Well, on the 16th of November, Sunak said he'd appoint an independent investigator to examine the bullying claims. This was done at Raab's request, it should be noted. 2 formal complaints by this point had been made against Raab, only back in his post 5 days by this point. One from his time previously at the Ministry of Justice, and the other from his time prior to that at the Foreign Office. Now, Raab requested this investigation to either shows that he expected Sunak to get him cleared, or he really truly sees nothing wrong in his behaviour. I'll come to his resignation statement presently. That kind of answers that question rather clearly. A week later, the employment barrister Adam Tolley, KC, was appointed. Over 5 months, Tolley looked into accusations against Raab. The number of complaints against him rose from the 2 official ones he began with, but so that by January of this year, some 24 people were involved at that point in formal complaints against Dominic Raab, reporting things like being physically sick before going in to see him, being left in tears, and even being left feeling suicidal. Nobody should be made to feel like this by their boss. Raab should have been suspended at the very least, the bare minimum, once this investigation took place. But Sunak was too weak even for that to happen. And this investigation, dragging out for 5 months as it did, is just completely unacceptable that Sunak did this, just allowed Raab to carry on as if nothing was happening behind the scenes, knowing, as he had to have done, some of the shit he was being accused of. No consideration for the staff involved here at all, not once. Sunak is only ever worried about his own position in all of this. Clearly, you can see no other explanation for it. Did big bad Dommy flush your head down the loo, Rishi? Did he nick your dinner money that your wife kindly gave you out of her latest dividend payments? I do hope it was in sterling and not Russian rubles in that case. Who knows what Dominic might do to you if that's happened then? You can just picture it, can't you? Like playground antics, Raab hanging Sunak on a coat peg or leaving him and locking him in the stationery cupboard. The trouble is, we're not dealing with playground antics where the teacher comes along and takes the bully to task. We're dealing with a grown man mistreating other adults and the boss sticking his fingers in his ears and going, la, 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 I'm not listening. Now, Sunak had, of course, always denied knowing anything about Raab's alleged behaviour, but you struggle with that when you think he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the same time Raab was First at Justice. You don't imagine Cabinet are completely oblivious of things being said about the goings-on in other departments. And indeed, Sunak kept up those denials even after the investigation began, that he had known about Raab's conduct before reappointing him to the Justice Department. But civil servants have reportedly said otherwise, with several spelling out Raab's behaviour at previous departments before Sunak gave him back his job anyway. Like I've said over and over, Sunak always puts himself first because his position as Prime Minister is such a fragile one, dependent on alliances with factions within his party, with key figures which you'd have to count Raab amongst, and without them his government would collapse. His inaction, then compared to what has happened since, however, will have weakened him in the eyes of the public instead, though, with elections coming up, regardless of what stitch-ups he's been performing within his own parliamentary party. Sunak let this happen, and he let it continue. Ultimately, after 5 months of investigation involving 24 civil servants and 8 official complaints, 6 from the Ministry of Justice and 1 each from the Foreign Office and the department for exiting the EU, Raab's department as Brexit Secretary, which was his first official ministerial post. Therefore, everywhere he has been, he's always had these accusations made about him. Adam Tolley-Casey upheld 2 of these complaints, having found Raab had acted in a way that was intimidating. Raab himself was interviewed as part of the investigation. He told Tolley that his approach was direct and inquisitorial, that he read all the papers and didn't appreciate things being read back to him that he had already read, and that he also expressed frustration with some of the quality of work done and the speed it was produced. It sounds like working for Raab is like answering to a cross between the Terminator and Torquemada. Raab would also get physical as well. If you didn't want to hear something, he'd put a hand up in front of a person's face to stop them talking. He'd bang tables to make his point. Tolley drew short of Raab being persuasively shouty or sweary, but did find him intentional in his actions and also vindictive, and very much the sort of person who lost control of his temper. Of the 8 cases, Tolley upheld 2 of them, as I said, saying that Raab engaged in abuse or misuse of power that undermines or humiliates from Raab's time as Foreign Secretary, and that Raab's conduct in the Ministry of Justice had a significant adverse effect on one individual and was found to be intimidating by criticising utterly useless work. Raab, during the investigation, this is on page 44 of the 48-page Tolley report, said particularly notably, I thought, that he expressed regret in relation to the impact of individuals which had been communicated to him during the course of the investigation, but that he did not offer any apology for them, given that he does not accept he'd done anything wrong. Literally, he had spelt out for him the effect his actions had on others, and he still wouldn't even accept any wrongdoing in it, let alone offer an apology to anybody affected. That line alone is chilling because it implies a level of sociopathy. There's something deeply wrong with him if told your actions have done this to somebody else, have had this effect on somebody else, and you just go, not my fault, nothing to do with me. Raab said he'd resign if found to have bullied anyone off the back of this investigation. The news broke, and Sunak sat on it too for a day. Too weak to sack Raab, apparently having a phone chat with him implying resigning was what he expected Raab to do. Too weak to sack him. Personally, I can imagine Raab turning him upside down, demanding he protect him, and Sunak instead passing out as the blood rushed to his head. At least that's the imagery that played out in my head. Eventually, some hours later, Raab did resign, with a resignation statement every bit as tone-deaf and tin-eared as you'd expect from a man having been told by 2 senior civil servants from 2 different departments on 4 separate occasions, no less, to moderate his conduct before we even got to the point he got investigated. He still didn't think it was his fault. He moaned that all but 2 of the claims against him were dismissed. He believes the findings in those other 2 were flawed and set a dangerous precedent for government where civil servants may, heaven forfend, stand up for their rights at work against an intimidating boss who would have been taken to the cleaners if he frankly had worked anywhere else but in government. Raab complained that the bar set by Tolley for bullying was too low and that the public expected ministers to operate departments at pace and to a given standard. But what Raab misses here is that the bar he considers too low to call him a bully was set by the High Court and set specifically in relation to the ministerial code Raab was signed up to. So hard cheese, sunshine, you've been held to account by the very rules you agreed to. I thought you were a lawyer, Dom. Did you not read the contract? The word sorry was what you looked for straight away in his resignation statement, but Raab was only sorry for any unintended stress or offence caused as a result of the pace, standards and challenge he brought to the department. Not in any way sorry for any of his behaviour. Raab is a bully. Independent investigation has found this regardless of Raab's own opinion of it. With complaints from 3 separate departments across 4 ministerial appointments, having ended up at Justice twice, of course, it's clear that this is a guy who cannot work well with others, has been intimidating to staff junior to him and to the very staff who actually run the department, run the country in effect, since ministers come and ministers go, yet they, the civil servants, so often remain. Instead of drawing on the wealth of experience he had to hand, Raab appears to have adopted an I know best attitude regardless of the department he was in charge of, and that can only ever adversely impact the efficiency of that part of government and the people working there. Raab has no business being a minister in any department, thinking the way he evidently does and behaving in the way he does. The refusal to admit even now when all is said and done to any wrongdoing at all. His seat is also a vulnerable one come the next general election, and after all of this, he absolutely needs to lose it. Solidarity to all those civil servant workers affected and involved in this dispute who've had to endure all of this. Thanks for watching. If you appreciated this video, please do hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment and hit the notification bell too so you don't miss the next one. Also, look out for me on social media and other interesting stuff by clicking on the Linktree link in the comments below. And I will see you next time. Cheers, folks.